All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Sixer Sense podcast. It's just me and Michael today. I'm Chris. We are recording right before game one of the NBA Finals, so we will not know the outcome, but it should be a good game. Michael, how you feeling?
I'm looking forward to it, Chris. I think it's going to be an entertaining series. I'm looking forward to seeing a couple, new fresh faces, both in terms of teams and players in the finals. I just think I'm hoping for a good series.
Yeah, me too. I really do think this is going to be entertaining basketball-wise, even if it's a shorter series. I think it's a good matchup. Of course, we're talking about the Sixers, so we're going to talk about draft stuff because naturally we are not in the NBA Finals. Number 3 pick looms large over these next few weeks, Michael. The draft is on June 25th, so we're just under that 3-week mark until the big game, the big day. I mean, look, I think we all know the general pool of prospects that are being talked about at this point. Ace Bailey is still the guy being projected to Philly on 90% of these mock drafts out there, at least by guys who are plugged in. But we keep hearing about the possibility that they might go elsewhere. A few names have been thrown around quite a bit. We're going to go through a list here. I'm stealing this from No Ceilings, who puts out a really great draft guide every year. Go check out their Substack. It's worth it. I think it's $15 to buy the guide, and it's one of the best draft resources out there. So free plug for them. One of their little sections on the pod is Sell Me This Pin. We're basically going to make elevator pitches here, Michael, for 5 guys who have been connected to Philly, who could be in play, whether it's at number 3 or if they trade back a few spots. And then we're going to dive a little deeper into some trade back options, different guys that we haven't maybe discussed quite as often. But let's start here with Trey Johnson, a guy I know you like, Michael. I'll give you the floor to make your Trey Johnson pitch.
Yeah, Chris. I mean, I think the pitch is pretty easy. The negatives are clear, but I think the positive, he has arguably the most translatable skill coming out of college that you could have an immediate impact in the NBA with, and that's floor spacing, ability to knock down shots from long range. He's arguably the best pure 3-point shooter coming into the draft out of college basketball last season, and I feel like that skill alone kind of helps the Sixers in terms of where they're kind of straddling the fence in terms of bringing in a guy that could help in the present. Obviously, with this team is currently constructed around Joel Embiid and Paul George, but also a guy that could, be part of the future core moving forward and kind of get the best of both worlds there. Obvious concerns about the main one being about defense. I'm not ready to write him off as a kid that can improve. I know the tape out of Texas was troubling on that end at some highlighted areas, but with the age, athleticism, and size that he has, I think that he could make strides to be, a solid defender. Probably not like an all defensive guy ever, but at least like a passable defender in the NBA. And I think the upside of, just the ability to come in and knock down the floor, knock down shots and space the floor already at such a high level at the young age would make him a nice fit just alongside the ball dominant players that the Sixers have, and a guy like Joel or Maxey or Paul. Just having another full guy that can space the floor around those things is something the Sixers always could use. So I think that's why he would potentially make sense in Philly.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I've obviously not been the biggest Trey Johnson proponent, but if you're looking for a guy who just clearly fits what Philly is trying to do, it's obvious why they might consider him. 6'6", 6'10", like you said, pretty good athlete, maybe the best shooter in this draft, led the SEC in scoring as a freshman. That was a team with a lot of NCAA tournament bids. Like, that was a very deep and talented conference, so that's really an impressive feat. I just thinking back to like my favorite memories of this Sixers era with Joel, a lot of them involve like JJ Redick or Marco Bellinelli or Landry Shamet or someone in that
Steph Curry.
vein. Seth just sprinting off a screen
Yeah.
and burying a 3. And that's like the kind of thing that Trey can do. He's a legit movement shooter, really high volume, has some stuff in his bag to like, he has, a nice step back. He can get to his spots in the mid range. Not a super advanced handle, doesn't really get to the rim yet, but that stuff can come along in time. Like you said, the defense is a concern. He's really thin, not super engaged on that end. But when you're 6'6" with a 6'10" wingspan and you can move like him, there's going to be some hope that you can improve.
Right.
So he's definitely a very clean fit, and I understand why Philly might want to put him, especially if you still believe in Joel Embiid. Then you can really start to make a case for him. So let's talk next, Michael, about one of the Dukies. Come on, Maluwatch, 7'2" center, 7'7" wingspan. We've kind of talked about what it would mean if Philly drafted him, but what's your elevator pitch for him?
I think the elevator pitch, Chris, is exactly kind of what you were just alluding to in terms of like talking about him. He would come in the short term. Obviously, he would be a guy that would be the provide backup reserve minutes at the center spot behind Joel Embiid, who will hopefully, knock on wood, be healthy, relatively healthy moving forward. So right off the bat, that's always an area of need. I know Adem Bonus showed like flashes of potential last season. I'm personally not ready to say that he's like the definitive answer as the backup center on the team moving forward. I think there's definitely a lot there to like, but I think there's more in needs to be shown in legitimate games and like high stakes games. A lot of the time that he played down the best second half of that season, that the Sixers were what they were. It was the lineups were mismatched, the games weren't very intense, for lack of a better word. So I'd like to see more from him. But Molly would come in and potentially give the Sixers good like backup center minutes immediately, and then with that'd be similar thing there, like one eye on the present and then one eye on the future. Like, is he a guy that could potentially grow into a starting center to kind of take the reins from Joel when and if that time comes in the next few years? Obviously, that you would have a young big guy to pair with, a younger McCain, relatively young Maxey still, and kind of like this younger nucleus. Again, that goes back to kind of like the two timeline thing. But I think the plus is that you would get, he looks like a guy to me that would be ready to come in and contribute to some extent, like pretty immediately at the NBA level, with just like the sheer size, the rebounding, the finishing ability around the rim. I think he could come in and give you some decent minutes off the bench right away. And then the hope is that obviously he would continue to grow and evolve.
Yeah, again, I agree with all the points you made. I think with Maluwatch, you're not drafting him if you're confident that Embiid has another few years in the tank.
Yeah.
So if you're an Embiid skeptic, I think you can really start to get behind a guy like Maluwatch. Daryl has said time and time again, we're taking the best player available. We're not concerned about fit. And whether or not you agree about Maluwatch being the best player available right now, he certainly has one of the highest ceilings in the draft. Again, 7'2", over 250, 7'7" wingspan, just a huge human being who moves really well in space. Those guys are not very common. He was a super efficient finisher as a freshman at Duke. Didn't play the biggest role, but did the small things at a pretty high level for an 18-year-old. Going to be able to protect the rim, going to rebound well. The defensive rebounding wasn't great at Duke, but some of that was just schematic. He was one of the best offensive rebounders in college, so I'm not really worried about the rebounding at all. Really high ceiling there is basically the essence of why you would pick Maluwatch. He's not going to play next to Joel. I don't think that's like a Twin Towers situation,
Nah.
but a guy who could be a franchise level player down the road if you end up pivoting away from your current franchise center. All
Yeah,
right.
you just we talked about this last time. You hinted at it too. That's just like something to keep in mind heading into the draft. Like, that's a huge, if he does end up being the pick at 3, or if they were to trade back to 5 or 6 and take him, like we were saying, that would probably tell you a lot about how the team feels about Joel's health moving forward.
Yeah, it's one of those things where Daryl has said that they think he will be healthy and that they're confident, but if they turn around and pick Maluwatch, then it's not going to take much reading between the lines.
Daryl has said a lot of things that haven't turned out true.
Yeah, actions mean more than words, I
Yeah,
would say.
so that would be an interesting one for sure.
Next guy up here, Michael, is another Duke product who had a really great season playing next to Cooper Flag on the wing. His name is Con Knuppel, Wisconsin-born 19-year-old freshman, one of the best high school basketball players in the state, turned into a really good number 2 option at Duke. What's your elevator pitch for him?
Yeah, I'm a big fan too. I think he would be a great fit in Philly right away. I think the pitch probably is that he can come in and contribute right away. Probably a pretty low floor and potentially like a relatively high ceiling. Like, I don't think that he's not going to be a bust. I don't think there's questions of how good he could actually be, but his skill set's varied. He doesn't really have like glaring weaknesses. Like, yeah, there's a lot of areas where he can improve, but he can shoot. He's a decent passer. I think the defensive potential with the size there, rebounding for the position, like you like a lot of things that you saw from him as such a young player. I think the IQ is pretty high too. Just a lot of tangibles and intangibles that check a lot of boxes for him. And I think whether it's at 3 or if he was a guy that maybe you were able to trade back at 5 and grab there and pick up another asset. Similar to Maliwatch, than his Duke teammate, I think it's the best of both worlds. Like he projects as a guy that would be able to come in. I don't think there's a world where he would be starting for the Sixers next season unless he came in and really blew the doors off in training camp and everything. But I think he's could project to come in off the bench, give you some legitimate minutes, and then a guy that you be a building block really for this team moving forward, and a position need too. Like obviously Paul George is there on the wing, but there's not like a lot of overlap with talent. I know that's not the main concern going into a draft, and we're drafting for best available, but I think that he brings a skill set that the Sixers certainly could use and don't have like a ton of.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think if you're looking at Knuppel, nothing is ever really guaranteed in the draft. There are plenty of quote unquote high floor guys who bust and vice versa, but he feels like the safest bet to contribute right away of the guys in this range on the board.
Yeah.
If Trey Johnson isn't the best shooting prospect in the draft, then it's Knuppel. He doesn't have quite as much of like the movement off of screen stuff yet, but I think he'll get there. The form is really clean, and obviously the touch is great. And I really think this guy has like a deceptively high ceiling. He finished over 60% of his shots at the rim, plays really decisively, has a really nice feel for the game, can play make out of pick and rolls, knows how to use his size to absorb contact on drives to the rim. Not a great defender, going to be limited because of his athleticism, but he's like a legit 6'6" wing who plays really hard and knows where to be on the floor. So I don't think it's going to be a total wash on that side of the basketball. And more shooting next to Joel Embiid is always a good thing. So I think this is a guy who can contribute right away and potentially grow into something more as things change and as this roster evolves. Because, when Cooper Flag went down towards the end of that ACC tournament, Knipple stepped up and was a really good number one option. So I think there's some real upside there that maybe people don't talk about enough. All right, next guy is a guy we've talked about plenty, the guard wing combo from Baylor, VJ Edgecombe. I think this is probably the guy folks are talking about most as far as like an alternative to Ace Bailey. What's your elevator pitch here for Edgecombe?
Just raw athleticism, super high ceiling, like a really high motor, a lot of things to like about him. Competes defensively. Um, I think the shot could improve a little bit, and I think it will. It's not like it's a broken shot or anything like that, but just a really high upside guard, a guy that looks like he could be a legitimate all-star, like all NBA level guard at the next level in terms of athleticism, playmaking, creating, finishing, just, a lot to like that he brings to the table. The concern obviously would be if you're talking about how the Sixers are already constructed, where he would fit in with a Maxey and a McCain and a Grimes, assuming that they're able to bring him back. But in a vacuum, if you're talking about just skill set, could probably come in and contribute even more than Ace Bailey as a rookie. Like I think he looks a little bit more polished, a little bit more ready to come in and really contribute right off the top. And then also, and potentially the same high ceiling. I think we're going to get to him. I'm not trying to jump the gun, but the thing with Ace Bailey, I think that everyone points to is the ceiling and how high it could be. And I think Edgecombe has, a similarly high ceiling just based off all the athleticism and the skill set that he already has shown.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think this is a guy that Sixers fans should be very happy about if he ends up being the pick.
Yeah.
One of the best defensive playmakers in this draft, averaged over 2 steals a game, blocked some shots, like just a super crazy athlete, like you said. The defense alone, I think, will give him value day one. Offensively, I think he's a bit further along than some people realize. Like the jumper is legit. He's a very smart player, knows when to cut, knows how to make the simple passing reads. Not the most advanced ball handler and self-creator yet, but when you're that explosive moving towards the rim, there's a lot of room to grow there as he develops. 19 years old, he has plenty of time to add to his skill package. So one of the highest ceilings, one of the best defenders. is going to be able to play a complementary role on offense early on, I think. Really not a lot of holes to poke in his game. So
Yeah.
I would be very happy with him at number 3. And that leads us to the last guy here, a guy we have talked about probably more than anyone else. The guy Sixer fans have certainly been putting through the ringer of discourse over the past few weeks
Yeah.
is Ace Bailey out of Rutgers. Probably the most polarizing prospect here in this top portion of the lottery, Michael. What's your elevator pitch for Ace Bailey?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Chris. He's definitely polarizing, and I think the elevator pitch is just the high ceiling. I think that's the one thing that you really point, kind of tip your hat on when it comes to Ace Bailey. Like if you go with him at 3, how much would he be able to come in and contribute immediately? That remains to be seen. But I think when you look at the upside of what he showed at Rutgers and back to his high school tape, like you see the offensive potential of a guy that's like a wing. He compared himself, I believe, to like Paul George, Kevin Durant, like that type of player. And obviously that's, the highest that you could possibly be. But you see flashes of that and the ability to create offense for himself, make difficult shots, which sometimes he relies on too much in college, which was, ended up being like a little bit of a knock in terms of the shot selection and the IQ. But, the ability to knock down shots, the confidence to take tough shots, like the athleticism around the rim, the two-way potential on defense with like the size, and he just fills a position of need for the Sixers that, you know, it always seems to need like a versatile two-way wing in the NBA today. If that hits, that's arguably like the most valuable position that you could have with the way the game is kind of expanded. So, I think the pitch is just you look at the potential and the ceiling and how good he could be. How much he'll contribute this year, I think, is remains to be seen. But with that pick, you're banking on what he could develop into 2-3 years down the road and potentially develop into a future cornerstone of the organization.
Yeah, I agree again. I had it said to me today, it was put like this, you can't really teach that level of size and athleticism. He's
Yeah,
6'9" in shoes, 7'1" wingspan, really great tools. The shot making is absurd. It's what the first thing you're going to notice when you watch a Rutgers game, when you pull up the highlight reel, is that Bailey can make some pretty absurd shots, really from anywhere on the floor.
yeah,
The efficiency was not great at Rutgers, but a lot of that is just who he was surrounded by and the kind of role he was playing. Some of that is his fault for maybe not seeking out better shots and maybe not playing within himself more. But you put him on a team like the Sixers, where he's pretty much the third, fourth option offensively. When he gets there, he's just not going to be allowed to take some of those crazier shots early on. So that might force him into a more refined role and up his efficiency.
yeah,
The defense wasn't great, but the tools are all there. There are plenty of flashes to believe that he can be an impact defender relatively soon. So while he's not my favorite guy in this range, he's definitely a positional fit, and the upside is definitely there if he commits to kind of refining that shot profile, passing the ball more, had a negative assist to turnover ratio, doesn't really get to the rim, but has the ability to, has the tools. All the tools are there. Everything that is a weakness right now can be improved upon. So if he does hit, like you said, Sixers could get a really special player.
and I do think he would benefit from a team like Philly where he wouldn't come in and be expected to be this top option, like 20 points, 20 shots a game type guy. Like if he falls to Charlotte or Washington, let's say, and where he would come into a team where you're there, he's immediately going to be featured. In Philly, when you're, like you said, Chris, like the fourth, third option on the team, and you already have established big dogs in Joel and Maxey and Paul George, and like he would kind of have to fall in line, learn how to play off ball, get better there, get better as like a spot up shooter, combined with the shot making and creation ability for himself that he already has. That I think that's really intriguing and enticing too.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't think he's obviously not my favorite guy for Philly, but I do think Philly is maybe the best possible spot for
For
Ace
his
Bailey. Like,
development. Yeah,
yeah, it's really a good fit for him. So that's why I'm not like completely just like in doom mode if they do take him. I do think there is a fit there and that it could be beneficial for him to kind of come up in a competitive environment like this.
yeah,
So yeah, I really don't want to see Ace Bailey like chucking 20 shots a game in Washington. I think that's bad for
exactly.
everyone involved.
Right.
I think Philly is probably
And I
the
think
right
that's where
spot
some
for
bad
him.
habits could come in. Like if he was in a situation like that as a rookie without the, like you said it too, like it'd be a shorter leash in Philly. Like there's no room for him to come in and chuck up 10 bad shots in a game when, those shots could be getting distributed elsewhere as opposed to like Washington, who else is taking those shots. So yeah, no, I'm with you totally.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting next few weeks to see how things unfold. We're just gonna get more and more information, more and more smoke screens. No one's really gonna know what's gonna happen until draft day. But
True.
you ready to talk about some trade back options here, Michael?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, this is sort of off the dome, so I don't know how organized and successful it will be, but we are going to talk about 5 options each. We'll probably have plenty of overlap, but we're going to rank our top 5 trade back guys, maybe towards the middle or late portion of the lottery, who Philly could target if they do trade out of the number 3 pick, Michael. Um, I think the only guideline here is let's just not talk about the guys we just spoke about, because I think those are options at number 3, and we just spoke about them. And obviously, Cooper Flagg and Dylan Harper are not trade back options.
Makes
So,
sense.
anyone else on the board? You want to go 1 through 5 or 5 through 1? It's up to you.
Um, we could do 5 through 1. Do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Um, I've talked about this guy quite a bit already, so it's not going to come as a huge surprise to anyone. But I mean, we've talked about him. I really like Derek Queen. I
Ooh,
think
yeah.
he's an interesting kind of middle ground between the Maui watch, like, oh, we're replacing Joel Embiid with this guy, versus you could maybe. I'm worried about the defense, but skill wise, there's a clearer path to him maybe fitting into some of those double big lineups. Plus, I think he's just a really cool and talented prospect. The reporting right now from KOC at the Ringer is that his stock has kind of tanked a little bit, that he got dinged at the combine for concerns about his conditioning, his lack of development as a shooter. All those concerns are fair and they're going to keep popping up, but this was a really special player at Maryland. Has a really unique blend of strength and agility driving the lane, really high level passer, makes some really bold and inventive decisions with the ball in his hands, has crazy touch around the basket, so I'm really not too worried about the 3-point shot long term. Has a lot to work on mechanically, but the touch is there, so it's a pretty good foundation, I'd say. So I'll put Derek Queen at 5. How about you?
I like that a lot. He's definitely on my list. I'm gonna go a guy. Not gonna be a surprise when you say it. I'm gonna go Rasheer Fleming. At 5 for me. It's a guy again. Like he's fallen down draft boards a little bit. He's projected in a lot of what I've seen in like the 20-ish range, like 20, 22, 23. But I just really like the skill set. I like the versatility as like a really long power forward, maybe like a small ball center in certain situations that can get up and down the floor, like space the floor, finish at the rim. Um, he's just to me like a really solid guy. Maybe it's a little bit of a Philly bias kicking in. He was on TV at bars around here a little bit more than some other players, so I got to watch him a little bit more, I think. But I'm impressed with the skill set. I think he's flying under the radar a little bit. It would obviously be disappointing if he's like the crown pick of the draft for the Sixers, but if it's a trade back situation where they end up with the 3 pick or like an earlier pick and then a later first round pick, I think he would be a really nice second pick from that first round that would come in and almost like a Swiss Army knife off the bench. Like you could play him at small forward, play him at power forward, like play him at center in a pinch if you need to. And I think there's room for growth there too. So he would be my pick at number 5.
Yeah, I mean, look, 7'5" wingspan,
Yeah,
super athletic, can guard all over the floor, and he hit a lot of threes. Like, that's just a pretty bankable set of attributes. Needs to maybe work on his decision making a bit, not super advanced on ball or anything like that. But if you can hit threes, fill the lane in transition and defend, you'll probably have a spot in the NBA. So I think that's a good shout. Um, Next guy for me, I'm gonna go with Jace Richardson
ooh,
out of
nice.
Michigan State. I know we don't need another guard. He's 6'2", maybe in shoes, but a 6'6" wingspan. He was a very good defender for the Spartans. I don't think he's going to have any trouble like guarding other point guards or anything like that. Can he really like find minutes behind McCain and Maxey and Grimes and anyone else next season? Maybe not, but I do feel like this is one of the most like NBA ready players on the board. Just super polished already. He's a scorer, can get to his spots in the mid range, has a crazy floater in his bag, good shooter, really high feel for the game. Didn't really play point guard at Michigan State, but I just have a feeling that with how quickly he processes the floor around him and how smart he is, that he can develop into that sort of player with more reps. Um, so yeah, I mean, like Jason Richardson obviously played in Philly, so there's some like familial ties here, which is just cherry on top. I doubt they go this direction. I don't think they're going to take another small guard, but if we're doing just like talent and trying to figure it out later, I think Richardson has a really strong case.
I'm actually right there with you. I had him at 4-2 also, Chris, and I don't have much to add to. I think that was like a perfect breakdown of what he could bring to the team. But I just tend to trust guys whose dads were in the league. Like I just feel like they end up panning out a lot of the time. I don't know if it's just the experience, like watching firsthand, like what seeing your dad, like what it takes to get to the league, or just the coaching as they come up. But like so many of the guards in the league today, just find a way, like Gary Payton, Brunson, like a bunch of these guys. Jason Richardson, ultimate pro for a really long time. I'm sure he's a great, coach for Jace. If he has anything of the hops and the athleticism that Jason Richardson had, it'd be really fun to watch at least. But I think, this concerns obviously the size, tough, a little bit small for the league, and then the repetitiveness with the Sixers. But in these, draft talks like this, I tend to operate in kind of like best player available, not as much like depending on the roster, construction. I tend to agree that I don't think they would go in this direction just because of, would he actually be able to play and contribute at all in the next like couple of years? Who knows? But in a vacuum, I think he would be an interesting pick as a like a trade back option for the team.
Yeah, and like I do want to like I do think he's a great fit skill wise. Like I think him and Joel could run some pretty cool actions. I think him and Tyrese and him and Jared both can play together. Can they all three play together at the same time? Maybe not so much, but if you trade back into the late portion of the lottery and you get a really good like sixth man guard, that's not a terrible outcome,
Yeah.
especially if you're winning games next year. Again, I think Jace is a guy who could help you win games pretty soon. So I definitely think he's worth talking about. Uh, at number 3, I even hesitate to call this guy a trade back option because he could like go number 4. But Jeremiah Fears
Yeah.
is a guy, again, like, are they going to take another guard? Maybe not. He's a little bit bigger than Jace. Maybe not quite as long. Definitely a bit skinnier, but it's one of the craziest athletes in the draft. Just super quick getting downhill, can shift gears, change direction on a dime. Really hard to stay in front of. The advantage creation is just like an instant star trait. Now his finishing and his shooting wasn't great at Oklahoma. Really was a pretty bad defender. You know, had a lot of turnovers, but he was also still super productive and drew a lot of fouls and led Oklahoma to the NCAA tournament with a not great roster around him as an 18-year-old.
True. True.
So, like, through sheer force of will, he put up numbers and got the job done. Is a really awesome talent with a lot of room to grow. Still super young. He has one of the highest ceilings in the draft. And I think if you trade back a few spots and think that this guy is a star, you take Jeremiah Fears at like 5, 6, 7, whatever, I can get behind that. I don't think it's a bad pick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I actually didn't include him in my top 5 that I kind of threw together before we hopped on here, just because I thought, like, if we're talking trade back, I didn't even know that he'd be available. But yeah, I absolutely agree. I
Yeah.
think there's definitely like a lot to like about him, and it's the only negative to me of taking a gamble on him is the same thing that we said about Jace Richardson. Is just the repetitive roster with the Sixers right now. But at number 3, I'll go with a guy that I know you're not especially fond of. You've mentioned it a couple times, but floor spacing is super important in the league today. It's super important for the Sixers. Liam McNeely, I think, is a guy that could come in and do, if nothing else, almost in like the immediate, like nature next season, come in and just space the floor around some of your, some of your guys like Joel and Paul and Maxi. Average like almost 15 as a game as a freshman, over 31% from three. I think that honestly felt a little low just from like the way watching him. You'd think would be a little bit higher. The shot is nice, like it's pure, really nice form. Can definitely hit it from NBA range, like take a couple steps back, won't be an issue. Decent size for the position, like decent rebounder, average like 6 a game, 5 defensive, 1 offensive. So like he's not a total slouch on the boards either. I think the ceiling is relatively low. Like I don't think he's going to develop into some all-star level player. But if we're talking about trading back into that mid to later first round, I think you could like make a case for him as a guy that would come in and potentially contribute to the Sixers in some capacity next season.
Yeah, like you said, I'm not a huge fan of McNeely, but I do think you can make a pretty strong case just based on the fit. Again, like context does matter for a lot of prospects and their success in the league, and he is in theory a 6'8" guy who can hit like movement threes and do a lot of the things that Philly has prioritized over the years.
Yeah.
I think Joel is a really good partner for him, assuming he's healthy. So I can get behind that. Went to a great school in UConn. Obviously, that program has produced some good NBA players of late. So I understand the appeal. Um, my number two is a guy I've talked about, 6'9", 7-foot wingspan, out of France, Noah Assange, playing with Ratio Farm Ulm in Germany this year. He's 3 days older than Cooper Flag, second youngest player in the draft. I think he gets kind of labeled as a raw prospect who's going to need a lot of time, and there's some truth to that, but he's already a guy who can probably defend 3 or 4 positions at a really high level. He needs to add some strength to handle more physical wings and forwards and bigs in the NBA, but really fluid and mobile athlete, can create a lot of havoc with his arms on the defensive end. Offensively, the threes need work, but frankly, the jumper looks fine. I think he will be able to shoot in time. Really smart, like cutter and just off ball mover, knows how to set screens, when to kind of move into open space. Seems to have a really advanced feel for kind of the small things offensively, which gives me confidence that the big things can develop in time. Has some really fluid and impressive drives to the rim when guys close out on him. So, like a big athletic wing with serious two-way upside who's still really young and putting the pieces together. Maybe not a guy who's going to play next year in Philly, but I think long term you could really make a strong case for him. He's going to be a top 5 guy on my board. I think he's really special. So if they traded back and got him, I would consider that a win.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you're high on him. I think you've actually talked me him up my board a little bit just from doing the podcast with you. My second number two is a guy that you mentioned a little bit lower on yours. It's Derek Queen, and I just think as a trade back option, that's like the ideal spot to get. Because we talked about earlier in this podcast about Miley Wash as a potential target for the Sixers with that that early pick in the lottery. And if we're talking to trade back, let's say they have like the fifth and like a 15, 16, 17, 18 pick. I don't know how great I would feel or a lot of the fan base would feel about using the high lottery pick on a center with, Joel, obviously, and the amount of time and money that he has left on his deal and the hope that he's still the guy that can lead this team at least to the conference finals. But I think if you add a player early in the lottery that comes in, with the high ceiling and high potential, and then you could nab a guy like Queen a little bit later in that first round that, like you said, kind of bridges that gap perfectly where like maybe he could give you some legitimate reserve minutes behind Joel in the short term. Maybe he could blossom into a guy that could kind of step into a starting spot in the long term. But I don't think he's a guy like you said. Also, he's seems to seems to have fallen down draft boards like a little bit. So he's not a guy I think that you would target now, like in the top 5 with that early pick. But if he's still hanging around mid first round, he was really impressive in Maryland as a freshman. On the glass, like finishing around the rim, hitting game winners in the tournament, decent shot. Like there's a lot to like about him. The motor I think is really high. So if you get him later in that first round, I think that would be a real coup for the Sixers.
Yeah, I mentioned the report from Kevin O'Connor. He has Queen going 18th to Washington right now,
Yeah. So
which
there. I mean,
seems ridiculous on the surface, but
yeah.
like guys fall for reasons that often aren't very good. Like Cam Whitmore was the 20th pick not very long ago for reasons that were never fully explained to us. Like guys fall for reasons that don't have anything to do with their actual performance on the floor in college. So
Yeah. I
I
mean,
can see where teams might overthink it with Queen, who's like not a great athlete, not a great rim protector, doesn't fit cleanly into a specific archetype. If you trade back with Washington for 6 and 18 and you
right.
can get Fears or whoever at 6 and Queen at 18,
That's
that's an awesome haul.
right.
And you might get two guys who are better than whoever ends up going number 3. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
That's
So,
almost like a best case scenario. I feel like right there, like getting two high end contributors like that.
yeah. And like Daryl is really great at just picking the guys who fall too far. He
Yeah.
did it with Tyrese.
If he's done anything well in Philly, it's been taking advantage of guys that have fallen in the draft for sure.
Most of the best front offices in the draft just take the guys who fall
All
further
to
than
them.
they should. It's a very bankable strategy.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, it works.
Yeah, it works. My number one here is going to surprise absolutely nobody who has listened to this podcast at any point over the past 2
I
months.
wonder where this is going.
Um, Colin Murray Boyles out of South Carolina.
Shocker.
He's one of the best defenders in this draft, in recent drafts. 6'7", 7'1", 240-ish. Really high level defensive player. Can guard on the perimeter. Can protect the rim from the weak side. Gonna have like 1 through 5 switchability in some matchups. Offensively, he doesn't really shoot. I understand like some of the positional concerns, but he's super forceful and acrobatic around the rim, has some really nice touch shots in his bag, can play make from the 4 spot. I really think there's like some star level upside offensively that people are overlooking because he doesn't shoot yet. Now, is he going to ever be like a great 40% volume shooter from 3? Probably not. But if he can just get to like a passable level so that it opens up driving lanes and lets him play downhill, I think he's going to be a really special player. He's going to be a top 3-4 guy on my board. Again, if you can trade back and get him and another asset, that's like a huge win. That's pretty much my ideal outcome. So,
Yeah, that's not a surprising answer, Chris. We
you know,
knew that we're coming, but no, you make a really good case for him. I do have concerns, obviously, more than you about the offensive side, but no way to argue about the ability on the defensive side of the ball and the ability to come in and contribute right away. My number one, a guy we've talked about a few times that I think you were high on at one point, maybe you dropped a little bit. AC Noel out of Georgia, just really like the size. I like the athleticism. He's like bouncy, good motor. Little bit of concern, like how good of a floor spacer he will be at the next level. He was like under 30% from 3 in college, but the shot wasn't like horrible. I think there's hope there for it becoming at least like respectable to the point that he could, stretch the floor out to the 3-point line, but real good around the rim, good rebounder, good size, like good frame, athleticism, could played like mainly forward, I think, but could definitely probably play some center, in the league with the size, wingspan. So kind of falls in that same thing that we were just saying about Queen. Like, I don't think that that type of pick would be best spent early in the lottery. But if it's a situation where you're, at 6 and 18 or 5 and 17, something like that, and you get that second pick coming through, I think he would be a guy that would potentially come in, fit really nicely off the bench as like a forward that could just come in and do some stuff for you. So I think he'd be my top pick here.
yeah, I think it's a good one. Again, just like a really great fit for what Philly needs. Was super productive at UGA, even if like maybe doesn't have the highest of high ceilings. Like didn't do anything super special offensively, but he put up points. Like he's gonna put himself in position for those easy finishes at the rim. Super good offensive rebounder. I think he's gonna be able to hit threes. Like just does a lot of the little things and the dirty work really on both ends, and is super mobile at 6'11". Also a UGA product, so I'm like obligated to root for him. So
True.
I wouldn't be mad at that. All right, you ready to talk about Kevin Durant?
Yeah, why not?
All right, Michael. The current reporting around Phoenix is that they want to trade Kevin Durant before the draft. That gives them about 20 days here to work with. I think it's pretty clear at this point that we are not going to trade for Kevin Durant in Philly. I think the Paul George number 3 pick dream, if it even is like a dream for anyone, is dead. But we have seen in the past how some unexpected trade options kind of open up in the aftermath of a big blockbuster. I think Lucas threw out the Drew Holiday to Boston situation a few years ago on the heels of the Damian Lillard trade. That kind of thing is always possible, and I think Daryl will be active in looking for ways to upgrade this roster. He's always on the hunt for value, and if it presents itself, he's not afraid to make a big swing. So
True.
let's just talk through a few of these potential situations with KD. I think the one gaining a lot of steam right now is New York, just because they lost in the conference finals. They fired Tibbs. They're kind of looking for how to take that next step. I believe it was Shams today. I think it was Shams who said that New York and Durant had mutual interest at the trade deadline and that New York tried to trade for him, which is super interesting because we didn't hear about that
Yeah.
in February. But if the Knicks do try to trade for Durant, I'm assuming it would probably not be Cat. Seems like OG or McHale and some, whatever else they can cobble together would be the more realistic avenue. I don't know your read on that, Michael, but if hypothetically you're Philly and you can use the number 3 pick and maybe Paul George's contract to get something like OG Anunoby in the 29th pick and whatever else gets thrown out to Phoenix, is that the kind of deal you're interested in?
It's so tough, Chris, because it's really, you know, antithesis to the idea of getting younger, and it's kind of putting all your eggs in the same basket. Like OG is obviously younger than Paul George, but a move like that, bringing him in, is to win now around this team. Which again, it makes sense. It all obviously goes back to Joel. Like if they think he's healthy enough, then yeah, a move like that would be potentially worth it to bring in, a two-way guy, top of the league level like OG. It's just, it's tough to read what they're going to do, but I just think that keeping that third pick and bringing in a young player is the most likely, route. But if they do decide that, they want to bring in a veteran talent to supplement the crew that they already have, that's not a bad trade to me. I don't hate it. I think OG obviously would fit nicely in Philly. He's a kind of prototypical guy that you want on the wing today as a defender, and would certainly help with some of the concerns with the backcourt of like a Maxi McCain and the defensive ability there. If you have OG, especially if you also still have Grimes, then you have a couple really good wing defenders to move forward with. So it's intriguing, but regardless of what the potential trade is, it's hard for me to wrap my head around them, parting ways with that number 3 pick, unless it's something that's like so obvious, like you would ask it and anyone would be like, well, yeah, of course you're going to do that. And I don't see that necessarily like materializing with the Durant fallout.
Yeah, I think that is fair. I tend to agree. Really, just thinking more about this now, I didn't put it in the agenda, but I think if you're throwing the number 3 pick around, it honestly might make more sense for Cat to be the guy. Like, if you're Phoenix and you're trading Durant for Cat, you're going to keep Cat. That's Devin Booker's best friend. You're not looking to flip him for picks and Paul George, probably. But,
Yeah.
like, hypothetically, I'd be interested in that sort of an arrangement. I could get behind it. You can maybe take Maluwatch at 3 if you're Phoenix. Maybe talk yourself into it. But yeah, I tend to agree. I just think there's too much of a gap in value between the third pick and whatever Philly gets back in addition to Anunoby. He is like 7 years younger than Paul George. He's 27, one of the best defenders in the league. Really great player, but it's probably not going to happen. This one I think is a bit more realistic and feasible. Houston has just a boatload of picks. I think they're a really strong candidate to trade for Durant here. Let's just say hypothetically, Michael, that the package involves someone like Tari Eason or Jabari Smith, one of these kind of big defensive-minded forwards that Philly needs, and the number 10 pick. Those guys get sent to Phoenix for Durant. if you're Philly, are you at all interested in engaging with the idea of sending Paul George and that third pick to Phoenix for, a couple of interesting wings in the number 10 pick? Is that up your alley a bit more?
A bit. I think it would make me consider it more. Would I go as far as doing it? Probably still not, but I like, it's certainly a position of need. It's one that would fit nicely both in like the short term and the long term potentially. They're both young guys. It's a spot that the Sixers could use now, and then they're young enough that you could, continue with them moving forward. Uh, we've talked about, I mean, the drop from 3 to 10 is a little bit steep, but it's like there's a lot of good players in that draft range from like 3 to 10, and so dropping back, you know, it's not the end of the world, especially if you're getting off that Paul George contract for a younger player that potentially fits better. I think that drop back is a little bit too much for me to like fully pull the trigger on this deal, but it inches closer to, if I'm the Sixers at least, something that I would consider doing in this situation.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It obviously depends on the exact dynamics of the deal, but like Tari Eason is one of the best and most underrated defensive players in this league. He tries really freaking hard all the time. He's really fun to watch. Hasn't played like a huge minutes load in Houston, has sort of been capped at like that 20-25 minute per game line, but has the potential to play more, and just his energy on the glass, that kind of thing is going to really benefit the Sixers. You get Jabari Smith, who's almost 7 feet tall and can shoot threes. Like, those are the kind of players you need. I don't think the gap in value between 10 and number 3 in the draft is very wide if you use your pick smartly for someone like Colin Murray Boyles. So
I
I'd
like how
be
you got that
really,
in there.
I'd be down for that. You know what I mean? But this is something that I kind of just, I don't know if I buy it or want it to. In fact, I don't think I do, but it's just an idea that came to my head, a hypothetical, as they say. Michael, how would you feel? We know the Timberwolves are interested in Durant. That might be his most likely landing spot based on wherever you're getting your reports. Hypothetically, you send Kevin Durant to Minnesota, you send Paul George and whatever picks get thrown around back to Phoenix, and you get Julius Randle and matching salaries in Minnesota. Is that the kind of thing you're interested in?
Nah, if you're making me watch Julius
You're
Randle
interested, yeah.
in a Sixers jersey, it's not something I'm interested in, Chris.
Yeah. Even I'm not saying you give up the number 3 pick. If it's just Paul George for Randle and like DiVincenzo, you don't want anything to do with it.
What does Randall have left on his deal? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it's a player option for next year, so it might have to be a sign and trade situation, which might complicate things. But
Yeah, I wouldn't feel good about committing to Julius Randle. I wouldn't call myself a hater, and I think he definitely surprised me a little bit with how he played for the Timberwolves, like down the stretch of the season. But I'm not a Julius Randle guy. I don't know how much he really elevates the ceiling. I personally just don't really like watching him play. Not my favorite like style. So just out of selfish terms, bringing him to Philly, I think is not something I'd be super interested in.
cool. Yeah, I agree. I really don't want Julius Randle either. He was super impressive in the first 2 rounds of the Western Conference playoffs. I wrote about it for the site. I was like, this dude is having a real moment. And like, I really don't want to blame him for the OKC series because that defense just makes it really hard on everyone. Like, Ant was also bad in the Western Conference Finals. I don't think we can sit here and say like, oh, the real Julius finally showed up. I think that is just a bad matchup for him. And he was genuinely really impressive in those first 2 rounds. So I do think he kind of silenced those postseason doubts a little bit.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
that's
there's
fair.
some merit to the idea of like his play style next to Joel, especially if you're not super confident in Joel having like another kind of playmaking hub in the front court who can create for Maxi and those guys. I can see the vision. Depends on who else you get back with him, obviously, if that's even feasible. But I think I'm with you that I'm probably going to pass in the end. All right. Are you ready to go
I'm
around
glad
the
we're on the
NBA
same
here real
page for
quick?
that.
Yeah, no, Lucas
Yeah,
might
let's
have
do it.
different thoughts if he was here, but he's not. All right. I feel like we have to talk about the Tibbs thing. It's like the big
Yeah.
news of the day or yesterday. There's been a lot of news today, but in the basketball world, Tibbs getting fired from New York, obviously a big deal. They made it to the conference finals for the first time in a while. This was like a real watershed achievement for them, and now Tibbs is gone. How did you feel about that, Michael? Do you think it was the right move?
It's a cold world, Chris. One day you're leading the Knicks to the first conference finals in 25 years. The next day you're on the unemployment line. But no, I was a little bit surprised. I really was. And that's coming from I've never been the biggest like Tibbs fan. I think his like shortcomings and deficiencies as a coach are pretty clear. It doesn't seem like he's too interested in improving. Like he looks to me like he has what he likes to do like his way, and he sticks to it. And I mean, it worked to get the Knicks back to relevancy, and just based off that success, like I was surprised. I feel like, he's had them trending in the right direction, obviously, for the past couple of years. Took the Sixers out in the first round last year, um, before dropping in the conference semis to the Pacers. Took it a step further this year. Ran up against the same, difficult Pacers team. That's clearly a tough matchup for them. But yeah, I was surprised. I thought after getting them back to the conference finals for the first time in so long, just that accomplishment alone, and then some of the way the players stuck up for him, specifically like Jalen Brunson after they were eliminated. He was asked pretty bluntly like if he thought that Tibbs was the guy for the team moving forward, and I'm pretty sure he just said like yes, like not even a question. And I think a couple other guys kind of doubled down on that. So the combination of like him leading this team as far as they've been in a quarter of a century, and the public support from some of the players, I did think it was surprising. On the other side, I get it. Like I said, I do think there's some obvious deficiencies in his approaches to the sideline. So it's not like shocking, but just based off the way, like the absolute high of this Knicks run and how how good and gelled that team seemed to be, it's pretty it's pretty surprising that they decided to make that move, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I did not see it coming. You know, like you said, everyone in New York seemed pretty content and in favor of Tibbs. The reporting for a few days after the series was that Tibbs was safe. So it really did come out of left field. As far as like whether or not it's the right move, you can certainly make a case. Like the way that Cat was used offensively did not make a whole lot of sense, especially after the All-Star break. Obviously, there is some pretty real friction, it seems, between Cat and other players and maybe the coaching staff as far as his defensive tendencies. Everyone has pointed out that Tibbs was fired in Minnesota when Cat was there. Maybe that relationship wasn't the greatest. So it'll be interesting. It obviously depends on who they hire next. There's like a real risk that it gets worse. I think Tibbs has a certain floor as a coach. Obviously, he like led that team to more success than it's seen in decades. So he's not a bad coach. If you hire the right guy who can maybe take you up a notch, then people are going to be really thrilled about it. They just need to nail this next hire. Um, yeah, is
Do
there
you think
anything
they have
else
a
you wanted to
roster
talk
though
about?
capable of going to that next level?
I mean, I think so. Obviously, maybe the depth needs to improve, but you look at like the bones of the roster. Brunson and Cat are top 20-ish, 25 guys. As an offensive duo, in theory, if you just run that pick and roll into the ground, those two are really hard to defend in tandem. You have two really high level defensive wings in Bridges and Ananobi. Like the foundation of a really good team is there. They have a more than enough talent, obviously, to get pretty far in the playoffs. The East is wide open. So I can see where next season with Boston hurt, with Philly being kind of in limbo, where you're like, okay, well, next year is really our year to kind of put our pedal to the metal and see what happens. I can kind of see the logic there. So
Yeah,
I definitely think they have the pieces.
fair enough.
Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to talk about, Michael?
Real quick, just because we had mentioned him as a potential trade target for Philly several times, like recently, and obviously some off the court stuff popped up. But basically, the Pelicans doubled down. New President Joe Dumars said that they were basically going to continue building around Zion Williamson. I think that came in response to some speculation that they could potentially look to move on from him this summer. Do you think that's the right move for the Pelicans, or do you think they should be looking to potentially, get out of the Zion business while the return would still be relatively high? Obviously, if he has, a couple more seasons where he spends more time on the sideline than he does on the floor, I think the value around the league is obviously going to go down. I think at this point, depending on what happens with some of the off court stuff, but assuming that he's able to be on the court, I think the value will still be relatively high. So, is this the time that they should be thinking about maybe moving on, or do you think their best course of action is, sticking with Zion and seeing if he can, get healthier moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously the off-court stuff, he's been there's some pretty serious allegations against him, and in that sense, I think getting out of the Zion business is maybe not the worst idea. Um, basketball wise, sure. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any trade value with the stuff that's been levied against him. So,
True.
um, yeah, I think it's pretty like upsetting the things that he's been accused of, and I would encourage everyone to go read those allegations and I guess come to your own conclusions. But not really a great spot for New Orleans to be in. They're Joe Dumars hasn't built a championship roster in 20 years, and some of the rosters he built after that championship roster were pretty bleak. So I really wouldn't feel great about things, frankly, if I was a Pelicans fan right now. But
True.
is what it is.
True.
All right. And with that, I think that means we are going to go watch the NBA Finals now. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of the Sixer Sense podcast. Please like, subscribe, follow along. We are on YouTube at the Sixer Sense. You can follow us on Twitter at Sixer Sense. You can follow me at Kline NBA. You can follow Michael at The Real Mike KB. And, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, those are the places to find us. And we will be back soon to talk more draft, more Sixers. Peace out.